Okay, before I properly start this video, I just have to address yesterday I got my first tattoo. I am in love with it. It's a little orange slice and it's so cute and I'm in love with it. I may talk about the meaning at some point, it's not particularly deep. It's a literary reference, as you would expect of me, but I just had to say, because you may well see it while I am gesturing in this video and I am in love with it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I thought I would have a little talk about some of the series that I have read this year. As we all know, 2020 did not go to plan for very many people at all, and so one of the few benefits of that was increased reading time. I took the opportunity this year to therefore dedicate myself to some much larger scope reading plans than I otherwise would have done. In other words, I read some series, because I don't normally have the time to dedicate that much time to one set of stories. But I think I read 5 or 6 different series this year. I really went hard on the whole multiple books front, and I thought I would talk about 3 of the ones that I revisited and particularly enjoyed this year. So I will go in order of when I read them because, oh boy, the first one I read back in January. Back when none of this seemed like it was going to happen. The first series that I read this year was the Ruby Redfort series by Lauren Child. Now, this is a middle grade, young adult series, which is a spin-off of one of Lauren Child's other stories. She wrote the Clarice Bean series, if you ever read that as a child. I never did. But in those books, Clarice Bean loves a series of books about a teenage spy called Ruby Redfort, and so, after a lot of badgering from fans, Lauren Child decided to write a series about Ruby Redfort. This series is 6 books long, and it follows Ruby Redfort, who is a 13-year-old girl who is exceptionally smart, and so gets talent spotted by a spy agency called Spectrum, who operate within her city, and so she then becomes part of their team and has to help solve cases. It is an exceptional series. It is one of those series that I have read so many times that now, you know, I last read it back in January and I can still tell you what happens in every single book because I've read it so many times throughout my life and I just adore it. It is brilliantly, wickedly paced teen/young adult thrillers about the most exceptionally smart girl you can possibly imagine. Like, she's described as super duper intelligent. She really is so intelligent. Ruby works as a code breaker for Spectrum, which is something that she ends up rebelling against throughout the series because she wants to be a field agent. But as a result, she has to crack some genuine codes, and Lauren Child worked with a genuine code writer to make sure that there were exceptionally smart, exceptionally difficult, and incredibly interesting codes for Ruby to have to break throughout the 6 books. Now, 6 books is quite a lot. Also, each one about 400 pages long. They're quite long. To be fair, the writing is short and there are long pages of pictures or of graphs or diagrams because of the code-breaking nature of Ruby's work. However, they are big books. And part of the reason for that is that Lauren Child had a thematic idea across it. The first book is called Look Into My Eyes, because the code is visual. Across the 6 books, Ruby has to break codes related to each of the senses. Now, there are only 5 senses, of course. However, there is the notion of a 6th sense. Intuition, whatever you might call it, your ability to just pick up on things, regardless of the facts in front of you, and be able to make assumptions and judgments purely based on your own feeling. And that is the 6th and final book, in which Ruby has to throw out all of her spy training and rely purely on her intuition, which is something she's struggled with throughout the 5 books as she has rebelled against her spy training in an attempt to get in on the field agent work. These books are just super duper fun to read. They are easygoing, the characters are really lovable. Ruby herself doesn't come across as annoying or pretentious, which she so easily could because she is a genius at 13 years old. But she is lively and fun, she's just the right amount of like teenage moody without it being stereotyped and annoying. It's set in the 70s, I think, so you very much get that sort of retro vibe. She collects telephones, she loves going to the diner, she eats donuts, they're her favourite thing, she drinks banana milk. She's very like, nicely stereotyped in a way that just makes her feel incredibly familiar and comforting, and I just adore these books. There's a whole host of other characters that you meet along the way. Hitch, her butler, who then becomes her spy mentor and the guy who helps her navigate around Spectrum once she's been employed by them. The housekeeper, Mrs. Digby, is just a delight. Her best friend Clancy is super funny and exactly the kind of contrast you need between him and Ruby. They're just, all the characters are great. You also get a brilliant swathe of villains with this. As I said, each book sort of tackles a new kind of code-breaking scenario. However, throughout the books you begin to be confronted with the possibility that everything Ruby has been doing for the past year has all been connected in some way, and so you run into a lot of familiar faces throughout it and find quite surprising connections between a lot of the bad guys she's having to face. They're all comedically villainous in the best possible way. Again, they're stereotyped in that kind of, you know, you've got the dark, brooding male figure, the femme fatale, the bruiser, that kind of thing, but you also get the secret ones, the surprising ones, and especially with the revelation in the 5th book, I believe, that there is a mole within Spectrum. Across these 5 books you've come to trust implicitly all these people that Ruby deals with, and then the idea strikes up that she can't trust one of them. One of them has been working against her this entire time, and that is what the 6th book is about, having to try and work out who it could possibly be who's been betraying her from the very first step, and that is where her 6th sense comes into it. It's fun, it's well written, it's engagingly written, the characters are super duper entertaining, and it's one of those books that genuinely really makes you think. I wasn't expecting it of a middle grade teen thriller, but it's got really serious codes, it's got really hard to break codes, like they have pages at the back explaining how they all work, because they're so complex and well thought out. I think my favourite one she has to break is one to do with smells and chemical compounds in the 3rd book, which is such an ingenious idea and I really loved it. But yeah, Ruby Redfort, one of those series I genuinely recommend. However old you are, we all need a bit of Ruby Redfort in our lives. She's a genius, she's funny. Love her. The second series that I'm going to talk about in this video is one that I read this summer after a conversation with some of my school friends. I say school friends, I don't go to school anymore, I'm on a gap year. But my my ex-6th form friends and I had a little meet up and we were talking about books we loved when we were younger, and this series came up. The Secret series by Pseudonymous Bosch. This is another kind of mystery, adventurous, middle grade series that I and a lot of my friends apparently read when we were younger and absolutely adored. I discovered this actually when the library bus came to my school when I was in year 4 or 5, so I would have been about 8 or 9 years old, really quite young, and yet this one really holds up. Again, it is a story about Cass and Max Ernest, although are they their real names? Pseudonymous Bosch as an author is very Lemony Snicket-esque. He's snarky, he jumps into the story to relay more information, but the whole way through he's trying to fight himself not to tell you this story because it is so dark and so secret that he couldn't possibly betray these characters. So he'll tell you the story, but he'll use fake names and a fake place. And did it all really happen anyway? He's not entirely sure. You can't trust him anyway, so why would you listen to him? So you follow Cass, as you refer to her, and Max Ernest, as you refer to him, and later Yo-Yoji, as you refer to him, as they get embroiled with a secret society of doctors and alchemists and generally creepy people who are intent on finding the way to immortality. And so each of the books deals with the characters accidentally running into this gang of villains again, and their attempts to try and find a new way to make themselves immortal, and invariably Cass, Max Ernest and Yo-Yoji stopping them, or at least preventing them for the time being. It leads them on some excellent escapes through some really excellent adventures, and they run into a whole host of really interesting things. These books definitely piqued my curiosity as a child. They talk about a homunculus, a person grown in a bottle who is neither human nor monster. It talks about alchemy quite a lot. It talks about chocolate making. It talks about medieval spies and the jester, that Cass knows she is in some way connected to, who is the reason why she has been invited to be a part of a second secret society who are intent on taking down the alchemists. I can't remember a huge amount of details about this one, unfortunately, because I only read one book as an 8 or 9-year-old, which was the third book in the middle of the series, so I was mildly confused by some of the references to past plots. But nonetheless, I then asked for the rest of the series and read it when I was maybe 10, but I haven't read it since then, so this was my first time going back to it as a now adult and reading these stories again, but they were still super engaging. As I said, the writing style is very Lemony Snicket-esque. It's all snarky, jumping in from the narrator, telling you to stop reading, telling you to stop listening. There's pages where he just writes the letter E over and over and over to try and get you to stop turning the page, all that kind of thing. It's hilarious. I still found these books super duper funny to read, even as an adult. And the plots were really engaging. They were genuinely thrilling. I think there's often a degree of judgment or pretension around children's books a lot of the time, and the idea that they are in some way easier to write than adult books, because adult books tend to deal with broader, more diverse and more difficult themes. However, having read Ruby Redford, having read the Secret series again, I disagree. I think it is very hard to write a good children's book because it has to be engaging for children. Children are infinitely curious, always want answers, and always want to know what's going to happen next. And so in order to keep up the kind of pace that you get in stories like Pseudonymous Bosch's, it takes a lot of effort to keep it all going, to keep all the threads running smoothly, and make sure that you get some kind of satisfying conclusion at the end of each book, as well as the end of each series. And so I deeply admire these books. I think these in particular, excellently written, excellently plotted, and just super duper fun. As I said before, I keep saying super duper. What's wrong with me today? The third and final series that I'm going to talk about in this video is one that I finished about a week ago, which I mentioned in my last video as part of my end of 2020 reading goals. This is The Secret Diaries of Adrian Mole. And I'm holding up the first one from when he was 13 3/4. Now, this is my first adult, or at least teen, series. I would hesitate to call it YA because I feel like it doesn't fit enough of the tropes and themes associated with the YA genre in order to qualify. However, it is invariably for teens and older people to be able to look at and laugh. This is comedy, in the best way. It is just a comedy series about a young man named Adrian Mole who is growing up in the 80s and about his mundane daily struggles. He is plagued by a family of working class northerners who just don't get why he wants to be a writer. He is plagued by his headmaster who doesn't believe in being liberal and against the system. He is plagued by Pandora, the prettiest girl in his class, who just won't notice him. He is plagued by the elderly man who he's had to volunteer to take care of as part of a school assignment. And he is plagued by being a teenager. He is plagued by being spotty, and by voice breaks, and by the hormonal changes that make life difficult. And this is just his secret musings on his life, and it is hilarious. Adrian Mole has zero self-awareness, he is completely oblivious, and the people that he interacts with on a daily basis are funnier, if anything, than him. His parents are the classic working class family who despise each other and are constantly arguing, but are occasionally nice to Adrian. They don't really like him that much, they find him quite difficult to deal with, and so you get a lot of Adrian going, "Woe is me, my parents don't understand me," which frankly for anyone over the age of 13 3/4 is hilarious. The diaries then progress. There's 8 books. They follow him going from the age of 13 3/4 all the way up to the age of 40. So you get to see the full progression of his life from pretentious 13-year-old all the way up to a balding 39-year-old who's on his second wife and third child, living in a converted pigsty next to his parents. I must say, the array of characters that he meets throughout his life, I feel is very, very interesting for me as a younger person reading it, because it feels like a fairly accurate depiction of life generally from what I've read of the younger years books. But it's interesting because I get to view what adulthood is like in that way, because it's his secret musings. He just talks about the things that worry him, like when he's 25 and he sees himself getting a bald spot on the back of his head, or when he's in his early 30s and he's dating yet another woman who doesn't seem to quite fit in his life, but oh god, now he's told her dad that he's proposed, and now he's engaged but he doesn't want to be. It's just all the ridiculous things that happen in life that aren't really meaningful or big in any way, but that are worth writing in a diary. I have one complaint with this series though. Throughout the series, Adrian is the butt of every joke. That's the point. He's comical, he's ridiculous. His lack of self-awareness and his complete obliviousness with regards to everyone else around him is what makes him such a funny character. He's gormless, he's stupid, and yet determined of his own self-importance. And so it's really funny to watch him be the victim to his own ego and his own stupidity. Throughout the books we see him, he tries sniffing glue when he's 15 and ends up with a toy plane stuck to his nose, for example, and ends up in the ER because of it. As I say, his marriages keep failing. He ends up working as a TV chef for a very little bit on a show called Awfully Good. But you lose some of that as he gets older, because Sue Townsend, the author, wanted to write a more sympathetic character as he gets older because of her own struggles with chronic illness and with continual pain. She wanted to write that into Adrian's story as a way to explore what she'd been through. And as a result, Adrian gets sadder. He stops being quite as funny. It's really easy to laugh at him as a headstrong 20-year-old falling in love with another therapist yet again, but when he's 39 and he's finding out that he may well have prostate cancer and that he might not live to see Christmas or to see his daughter grow up, it stops being funny, it starts being real. That was an element that's always been there in the Adrian Mole books, is that yes, this is real life, and so Adrian goes through enough tumultuous times with his parents splitting up and getting back together again, and then splitting up and then getting back together again, and I think 3 times splitting up and getting back together again. But it's really difficult actually to see him become an invalid, become someone who is ill and who is sad and who has genuine reason to hate his life. Throughout the books you kind of rely on his constant upbeat personality and his determination that he will make it as a writer because he is brilliant beyond words. And it just gets sad when you see him become a man who lives alone in an apartment with increasing credit card debt in his early 30s, still single, still alone, not seeing his son anymore. And then when he's finally with his second wife, with the daughter he's always wanted, and he finds out he has prostate cancer, within a couple of weeks of finding out his wife is having an affair, and she then leaves him for a much richer, more handsome man and takes their daughter with her. It's difficult because as much as I appreciate the series for how real it is, you know, it talks about real life events like the invading of the Falkland Islands in the 80s, the rise of Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair's government in the 2000s because Adrian's first girlfriend Pandora becomes one of Blair's babes, and so she is at the front of the political foray in the early noughties. And so it's hard to say. I like seeing the real life through Adrian's lens, but I don't want Adrian to experience real life. It gave me conflicted feelings, and to be honest, I don't regret reading it. It is just a hilarious series from beginning to end, and there are enough funny moments, even in the final books, where he's genuinely quite downtrodden and quite a sad figure, to make it worth all the sadness. I will briefly talk as well about the very, very ending of the final book, because I think it's interesting enough. We love Pandora. She is the daughter of a middle upper class family. She writes the school newspaper. She's incredibly clever and incredibly beautiful, and yet she refuses to lose her virginity to Adrian Mole when they are 14 years old. And she is the white whale of Adrian's life. As much as his one goal is to get published, he still can't get Pandora out of his head, even when he's on wife number 2, child number 3. She is one of the few recurring characters who is in every single book, regardless of the point in Adrian's life he is at. Pandora is the only one who I think you can both love and hate as a reader. She is inarguably stereotyped, and of course because we're seeing her through Adrian's incredibly misogynistic, lust-driven lens, she does come across as a bit of a femme fatale figure. But she's there for Adrian a lot of the time. She stays in his life despite his constant pining after her, despite her being constantly pursued by this guy she dated as a teenager, even once she's been married, once she's in relationships, once she has made a really successful career for herself. And actually what I find interesting that Sue Townsend chose to do is that the final line of 8 books following Adrian's life, when he is alone, living in a converted pigsty next to his ageing mother and father, he is down on his luck, he has no money left, he is just recovering from cancer, he's just been told that his cancer is beginning to go into remission, and Pandora arrives on his doorstep, and the final line is, "I got up and ran to her," which I found incredibly interesting. My old romantic heart says, wouldn't it be lovely if Adrian and Pandora really were each other's endgame, if they ended up living together forever, if they had children? But the cynic and the realist in me says Adrian and Pandora aren't meant to be together. Adrian was a mistake Pandora made as a young teenager, and she deserves better than Adrian, frankly, and Adrian deserves better than her. They're not the right characters for each other. But I thought it was kind of nice that at the end of 8 books following this guy's life, as he goes through incredibly mundane losses and wins, that he does get to see his old crush, and there is the implication that they might mean more to each other. I mean, there was a book 9, there was going to be a book 9 apparently that Sue Townsend was writing, but she died before she got to finish it, and I am curious to know what happened to Adrian. Did he and Pandora get together? What happens with his children? What happens with his ex-spouses? But we'll never know. Either way, I felt incredibly happy rereading about Adrian's trials and tribulations, laughing at him, commiserating with him, and just overall being thrown back into this northerner lifestyle where he's continually determined he will be a writer. It's incredibly engaging, incredibly entertaining. Sue Townsend has mastered his voice throughout the 8 books. She knows exactly how he sounds, and the diary entry format just makes it even funnier, because you get to watch the progression of things across days, months, years. It's just funny. It is one of those books I feel like you should turn to if you just need a bit of levity, especially the younger years ones, because they are just so funny. However, I think my favourite one is, I think it's the 4th book, where he meets Jojo, his first wife, and where he is working as a chef in a restaurant, and when he ends up on the TV show Awfully Good. But generally, I loved them. I love all the books that I've talked about in this video, but this, that's backwards. But this one in particular is just so light, so funny, definitely worth it if you're just looking for a laugh, and because for the most part, they're pretty short books. Those are 3 series that I have read this year that I have thoroughly enjoyed. 2 of them are more kiddie, so I would recommend if you're looking to turn to something a bit more easygoing but still engaging, particularly as we head into the Christmas period. If you just want some light relief, bit of Ruby Redford, bit of Pseudonymous Bosch, would recommend. If you're looking for more cynical humour, Adrian Mole is definitely the way to go, but yeah. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed hearing about 3 of the series that I enjoyed reading this year. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Comment down below, have you been reading many series this year? I feel like this has been the best year to actually crack on and dedicate yourself to a really, long form story in that way, so let me know if you've read any good ones. Feel free to subscribe if you would like to keep watching more of my bookish content, and I will see you next time. Hello, and thank you for coming back. Thank you. Nope. Please, I'm gonna sneeze. Oh, I've got sparkles from my necklace. You see that on the wall? A little bit. Anyway.